Mr. Chairman, we are live.
Thank you. Welcome to the Judiciary Committee meeting. Today we are here in session from noon to 2. Our House convenes at 2 o'clock to continue its general file discussion, which today involves education, one of the most important topics that the legislature will undoubtedly hear this session. So that just gives everyone an idea of what we have in front of us in terms of time. I have a room full of people eager to listen and probably even more eager to testify, I hope. I have, at least in front of me, an idea, a sheet of testifiers who may be joining us in the virtual world because this is a hybrid session, although more could come. So looking at my list and looking around the room, I think what I'm going to do for today's meeting is the way that we will proceed is I'll turn over the meeting to the bill sponsor. And the bill sponsor has advised me that as part of his presentation, we have a few individuals who will be part of his presentation. So we'll go through the bill sponsor's presentation before we open it to general public comment. When I go to general public comment, I'm going to limit the time that every individual has to speak to 3 minutes. So be thinking about that now, thinking about your time. That's your time to speak. Of course, then the committee has time to ask questions. So you may end up with more time if there are questions. And I think that's probably it in terms of the rules of procedure. All other rules of decorum obviously apply to this meeting. Questions, if you're new to the, I should say this, if you're new to the presenting process, questions just go through the chairman. So I'll call on my committee when they want to ask a question, and I'll call on the individual to respond to the question. And that's really just the format. I think that's it. Go ahead and call the roll.
Chairman Olson and House Judiciary Committee. My name is Carol Nickel-Larson, and I'm a substitute for Kay Benning today. So thank you for having me. Representative Crago.
Here.
Representative Larson D.
Here.
Representative Oakley.
Here.
Representative Provenza.
Here.
Representative Williams.
Here.
Vice Chair Washut.
Here.
Representative Yen.
Here.
Representative Zawanitzer.
Here.
And Chairman Olson.
Here. Representative Sweeney, welcome to the Judiciary Committee.
I'm a little intimidated. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Judiciary Committee. And we bring you today House Bill 218, Bias Motivated Crimes. And to begin with, I'd first like to thank, I'm really kind of a Johnny come lately to the bill, but I've been involved with this, and I'll talk about that later, for 20 plus years now, since, well, I'll talk about that later. But I'd first like to also thank former Representative Sarah Burlingame for all of her hard work on this subject matter, Sandy, Representative Newsom, and of course, Representative Conley, Minority Floor Leader, and Representative Swanitzer. You heard in the governor's opening remarks on his State of the State, some comments from the governor in relationship to the equality state. And Article 1, Section 2, equality of all in their inherent right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness All members of the human race are equal. But I ask you, is Wyoming really the equality state? If so, why is Wyoming one of 3 remaining states not to have passed hate crime legislation? Our purpose here today is to hopefully bring us up to speed as a legislative body and try to point out the value of the legislation and taking a harder look at this. Today, 47 states, the District of Columbia, and most U.S. territories have statutes with penalties for bias-motivated crimes. A bias-motivated crime occurs when a person targets another person or property for crime because of some aspect of the victim's actual or perceived identity. Those characteristics can include race, color, ethnicity, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, gender, sex, gender identity, or disability. Wyoming is just one of 3 states without a bias-motivated crime statute, commonly referred to as the hate crime law. The other states are Arkansas and South Carolina. Legislation is pending in both of those states and has strong support in the business community and with many civil rights organizations. Hate crime laws have a long history in the United States. The first hate crime laws were passed after the Civil War, beginning with the Civil Rights Act of 1871, in order to combat the growing number of racially motivated crimes that were committed by the Reconstruction era KKK. The modern era of hate crime legislation began in 1968. Congress passed the Civil Rights Act in 1968 to address racial violence against African Americans and civil rights workers. 1996, the Church Arson Preservation Act. Hate Crime Statistics Act of 1990, Hate Crime Sentencing Enhancement Act of 1994, and in 2009, Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Preservation Act. In Wyoming today, if a Wyoming citizen were the victim of a violent crime, and that crime on its face was clearly intended to intimidate a person and their community with which they represent or identify that victim, would not be able to demand in a Wyoming court that justice address this fact. This does not intend to suggest that Wyoming's judicial system is weak on crime. Just the opposite. Wyoming is tough on crime, and the current criminal statutes and sentencing guidelines are strong. However, the point here is if the justice sought for the crime includes a statement that violence intended to send a public message or intimidate a victim's community, think of a church fire, that victim would have to hope, and in this day and age, hope is correct, the U.S. attorney steps in and decides to prosecute in federal court. So that, in my mind, is why we're here today. This is not the case in the 47 other states that this causes Wyoming to stand out unnecessarily, in my opinion. This is the genesis of this effort and this bill this year. Moving bias-motivated crime legislation forward in Wyoming is an opportunity to affirm that Wyoming's law enforcement community, prosecutors, and judges are tough on crime in Wyoming. Finding a consensus bill will send the requested statement to the world business community is seeking and ultimately achieve the goal of allowing victims of a bias motivated crime a path forward to justice in a Wyoming court, not a federal court, as is needed today. And before I turn over to the good minority floor leader for the explanation of the bill itself and that we can go through, my interest in this was piqued. For those that don't know about my past, I used to own the old Ramada in Casper, in which we called the Parkway, renamed the Parkway Plaza Hotel. And during that time period, I hosted, unfortunately, there was a need to host the family during the funeral for Matthew Shepard, who was from Casper. And after all of that, I went to our corporate attorney and said, why don't we pass a hate crime law? I don't understand. And it was a tough day for Casper. Reverend, I can't even remember I think it's Phelps, and his group appeared, but the city of Casper did a tremendous job of keeping it constitutional in their effort to protest the funeral, and did a magnificent job, I think, on a horribly snow day in Wyoming. And the answer from my attorney was, we already have statutes in place. And we do, but not what is needed in this day and age. And I just truly believe that I hope the committee will see the value. Certainly, I don't want to have Wyoming as the last state to have enacted something like this for the protection of all of our citizens. And with that, Mr. Chairman, if allowable, if I could turn over the explanation of the bill to Representative Conley.
Thank you, Representative Sweeney. And committee, just to be clear, what I'm doing is allowing Madam Minority Floor Leader Connolly and I believe Mr. Nikagopian are part of Representative Sweeney's presentation. So after they complete the presentation, we'll open the questions up to the three of them. Please, Representative Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Friends, if you'll indulge me for just a second. This morning, I presented a bill in the Revenue Committee. It was a bill that was designed to expand our sales and use tax revenue. And it was in a room just like this. And the good chairman pointed out that there was the whole group behind me, right? Dozens of people who were ready to testify against the bill. And the euphemism for that is you've got a target on your back, right? All right. You know what? We come here and we know that we do that hard work. We have our targets on the back for some of those difficult issues. But the reality is that target on my back this morning was nothing like the target on my back that I have had being in Wyoming as an out lesbian. Right? That target has been pointed out to me over and over and over and again. And many people have told me that I'm brave. And it occurred to me, no one should be brave for simply existing. right? Simply existing. I'm not here for me today, but honestly, for the next generation that I see behind me, the students that we want to keep here, our friends and our neighbors, our own children, who, let's face it, Wyoming continues to have the reputation as a state, euphemistically called, instead of the equality state, the hate state, right? Because we have done nothing, opportunity after opportunity, to recognize, right? To recognize that we have citizens here, that we have those who need to be protected by our laws, and they don't right now. We need to change that, and this is one of those opportunities. So now, Mr. Chairman, let me tell you that what you have in front of you is a bill. Now, this is where I get more comfortable, right? That we have a bill that has in it basically examples of statutes that have existed, that do exist elsewhere, with a slight Wyoming spin on them. And to know that the kind of coalition that put this together decided to keep everything in it, because your minds, our minds together are good, right? They're better than the one. And there are things in here, I think, for everyone to like and not like. So if I may, very quickly, I'll walk through the bill. All right. 11141. So on page 2, this allows for us, and it's, I'm sorry, but your definitions will come after, but this right here will allow for a civil liability for a bias motivated crime. And what this here acknowledges is that there's some damage that can come to property, that the damage itself is minor, but when the motivation is because of being gay or Black or Christian or Muslim or disabled, that makes a difference. So, for example, right, somebody urinates, right, wherever, right, that's just gross, right? The damage is probably minimal. Someone urinates at a church altar, and for those of you who are Christian or coming up on Good Friday, someone who urinates on a church altar on Good Friday, the meaning behind that is far more. A cross burning in the prairie. If you think of it as just a little fire outside an African American's home, right, it becomes very different, right? Burning the prairie, right, could get you a couple $100 fine. It is much different if it's done outside of an African American's home. So this would allow for a civil liability for a bias motivated crime. All right, moving over to page 3. This is where we get our definition, because we don't have it in statute right now. You'll see that it is when, with a question of fact, there is an intentional selection of a person or property because of race, color, ethnicity, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, sex, gender, gender identity or expression, or physical, intellectual, or developmental disability, violating a whole series of crimes, which I can read off quickly for you if you'd like, but if not, you can just ask me and I'll read them off for you. All right. Moving over to page 4. Part B is belt and suspenders, simply saying that a court shall not consider, for purposes of sentencing, whether a crime was bias motivated if any of the elements above are already required for that conviction. For me, well, I can give you an example there. The next one is that this is an interesting element that allows for a different kind of penalty, right? That it allows for kind of understanding that a fine, might not be the acceptable penalty, but instead community service, treatment, education, et cetera, might be an appropriate remedy, right? Part D is one of the elements that we talked a lot about. Our criminal statutes already allow for severe penalties, right? There's no two ways about it, they do. So what this basically says is that this is not an enhanced penalty statute. Instead, it is something for a judge to take into account with sentencing. But it's not like in other jurisdictions where they would call them plus ones, right? An additional year or something like that. All right, the next section, which goes over a couple of pages, increases the reporting requirements. So know right now that there is some reporting of bias motivated crimes that is done in the state, but we know so little. The bias motivated crimes that we know about are reported on a form, right, that every police department fills out, typically for what are called index offenses, right? The top crimes, robbery, burglary, arson, car theft is included in there, but the index offenses, right? And there's a little checkbox if there's bias motivation, all right? What this does is require additional reporting. So for example, in my community has a park in the middle of the city. It is where there is a little pool for kids, et cetera, right? It's where the band shell is, right? Right? You get your community band playing. It has a flagpole, right? The flag was taken down and a swastika flag was put up, right? In another community, I know that there was a Koran that was burned, right? Those weren't reported, right? They're not reported. What this section does is sets up a mechanism for reporting so we understand, right, those kinds of crimes that are happening or those kinds of incidents that are happening, all right? Because again, these incidents, it's not about someone being naughty, right, and flying something on a flagpole. It's not about being naughty. It's not a prank, right? That sends a message, right? The same as that cross burning, a Koran burning, right? That sends a message. So we want to know about those messages. Okay, when you look at page 6, this requires that there is training of law enforcement, right? That we already have put in our statutes that there must be training of law enforcement in a variety of ways, including on issues of, for example, sexual assault, right? This puts in training for bias motivated crimes. And finally, actually, that's it. That goes over to 2 sections. So, Mr. Chairman, that's a very quick overview of what the bill does. And know again that each of these elements exists in some of the statutes that exist elsewhere. Not all of them exist, and not all of them exist in the same kind of way. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Connolly. Mr. Agopian.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Judiciary Committee, my name is Nicholas Agopian. I'm representing the Greater Cheyenne Area Chamber of Commerce and the Freedom from Hate Coalition. The Freedom from Hate Coalition is made up of a group of companies from around the country, groups around the state, including AARP of Wyoming, AT&T, Bicycle Station here in Cheyenne, Wyoming, the Cody High School's Youth for Justice, Delta Airlines, Expedia Group, the Greater Cheyenne Chamber, Heart Mountain Wyoming Foundation, IBM Corporation, Keurig Dr. Pepper, the Matthew Shepard Foundation, Microsoft, Millipore Sigma, the NAACP, Colorado, Montana, Wyoming State Conference, NAACP Unit 4108, the Cheyenne branch, Petroleum Association of Wyoming, Salesforce, Sunlight Sports in Cody, Wyoming, Swire Coca-Cola US, the Coca-Cola Company, the Home Depot, Toyota Motor Vehicles North America, Union Pacific Railroad, United Parcel Service, Walmart, and the Wyoming Business Alliance. All of these businesses have a connection to Wyoming in some form or fashion. You've received communications from some of them, and I think you'll hear from a few more today, either in the room or via Zoom. As you've heard, Wyoming is one of 3 states without bias-motivated crimes legislation, and that's what has drawn the attention of these larger businesses that operate nationally. They see a blank spot on the map when they look at what states have hate crime legislation. They see three blank spots on a map, Wyoming being one of them. The bill before you proposes that the commission of a bias-motivated crime will be considered by a court at the time of sentencing. For a bias-motivated crime to exist, a violent act against a person or property must occur. So before we go through a scenario, let's identify in section, I guess it's in section 1, page 2, lines 20 through 22, and then page 4, lines 1 and 2 lists those violent crimes. Murder in the first degree, murder in the second degree, manslaughter, felonious restraint, false imprisonment, sexual assault in the first degree, sexual assault in the second degree, sexual battery, simple assault, battery, aggravated assault and battery, child abuse, abuse, neglect, abandonment, intimidation or exploitation of a vulnerable adult, strangulation of a household member, domestic battery, arson of the third degree, and property destruction and defacement. These are serious crimes. The commission of these crimes is when, through training, they would look to see if there was bias motivating that crime. And only in the commission of that crime would this bill come into play in these crimes. Representative Sweeney and Representative Connolly have taken the committee through the components of the bill, the civil liability, the definition with the protected classes on page 3, the training requirements for law enforcement, crime reporting, and then the consideration by a judge during sentencing. And so I think today we're here to talk, and I think you're going to hear from members in the audience, online and in the room. What does it mean not to have this type of legislation? And what does it mean for the citizens of Wyoming when it's not in place? I want to draw your attention to go back to what Representative Sweeney suggested about protecting Wyoming citizens. I want to focus on the criminal prosecution process and the role of a victim and their family throughout the criminal prosecution. Now, I have to admit, I'm an attorney. I have never practiced criminal law. And I think this is probably the first time I've ever been in front of the Judiciary Committee in 12 or 13 years of lobbying.
Well, welcome to the Judiciary Committee.
Thank you. Thank you. We all know, and Representative Sweeney suggested, in Wyoming prosecutors are close to their communities, many of which are elected by their communities. And even more so, Wyoming has a reputation as being tough on crime. To this day, the death penalty is still available for first-degree murder. And that there's no reason to believe that a Wyoming prosecutor won't prosecute a violent crime. There's absolutely no reason to believe that. There's no facts that anybody's going to bring before you today that would suggest that. And I want to just be clear. We're not here today to suggest that the problems related with not having a bias motivated crime are the result of prosecutorial or misuse of prosecutorial discretion. Wyoming prosecutors are tough on crime. But the situation that we want to talk about is when the prosecutor is working with a victim. It is the justice for them that society is trying to provide through the criminal justice system. I want to talk about the situation where violent crime is committed against a Wyoming citizen, and on its face, it is motivated by bias as defined in this bill. And by the bias, and it is motivated by the bias against that individual in the community they may represent. In that instance, we may take great comfort that the Wyoming law enforcement and Wyoming prosecutors don't just let such acts stand. Wyoming is tough on crime. But what happens when the victim seeks justice in a way that requires the crime be acknowledged as bias motivated? We're talking about the situation where an individual, it could be within a mile radius of this Capitol at one of the many churches, where that individual is participating in at a community event that church or that place of worship is holding itself out to introduce itself to the community. And that individual walks out of that building, that house of worship, and is attacked because they are associated with being in that building. That is what I'm talking about, where on its face, it is driven by bias. Today, that victim would have to seek justice in a federal court. Federal law can step in where Wyoming cannot. And what I mean where Wyoming cannot, we're talking about creating a tool with House Bill 218 for prosecutors and judges so they can respond when a victim says, justice for me requires a public acknowledgement of the crime that was perpetrated against me. They would be seeking to have, in order to have that occur today, you would be going to the U.S. Attorney here in Wyoming and asking that charges be brought in federal court under the Shepard-Byrd Act of 2019. That that legislation, that federal legislation, and the protected classes in that legislation mirror very closely the language in the bill before you in House Bill 218. So today we're here to begin this discussion, and it's the first time this bill addressing hate crime has been before the 66th. And in more than 5 years since it was attempted previously, I think it was 2015 was the last time a similar piece of legislation was brought forward. Since then, in 2020, Wyoming has issued, there was the Wyoming Advisory Committee to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, published its report, examining hate crime in the equality state. The top finding from this report: because Wyoming, known as the equality state, does not have a hate crime law or non-discrimination protections, there may be negative economic consequences in terms of attracting future businesses and residents with diverse backgrounds for moving to the state. On a philosophical level, it may demonstrate that the state tolerates discrimination against individuals regardless of whether they belong to a protected category. Is this bill the solution? It may be. Other states have found unique ways to pass hate crime legislation that protects their citizens. But it's important that we begin moving in the right direction. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for any questions. I would apologize in advance to the committee. At some point, you've seen me looking at my phone. As everybody here is aware, appropriations is meeting 3 times a day, 2-3 times a day. And I have a bill up in front of appropriations at some point. So if I excuse myself from the room for a minute, I will be back, and it's no indication of the interest and value that I place here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gopian. You gave me a slight PTSD remembering what it was like to serve 2 years on the Appropriations Committee all day long, every day. Committee, questions for the presentation? Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Gopian. Or I guess also should say hello and welcome to Representative Sweetie and Representative Connolly. So looking at this bill, and very clearly, obviously, as stated, so this does not seek a penalty enhancement for anything. I'll say misdemeanor or felony. This is not in any way making it quote unquote tougher on crime.
Representative Connolly.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Oakley, that's correct. It's a factor to be taken into account with sentencing. It is not an enhanced penalty.
Representative Oakley.
Thank you. And so then I'm interested in, there was quite a bit of discussion that you'd have to be prosecuted in federal court in order for this to be, I mean, is that true? I mean, the reality is this doesn't add, it doesn't either create a new crime, nor does it add a sentencing enhancement. So what would be the distinction, or is there one between, that discussion between prosecuting in state courts versus federal?
Mr. Agopian.
It's my understanding, I think Representative Connolly will correct me, that it would allow for the charges to be brought, but the penalties would be consistent with the underlying violent crime offenses listed in the bill. And so it is through those charges being filed is the scenario I'm talking about, with that victim seeking that level of justice and the acknowledgement of the crime that was perpetrated against them.
Follow up? No. Vice Chairman Washut.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Whichever of the three of you, welcome.
So this is.
All right. And we're back. The question is about a burden of proof. Representative Connolly?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Washit. It's a good question. We didn't talk specifically about burden, but the assumption is that it would be taken into account as any aggravating or mitigating circumstances are when it comes to sentencing. But that's a good question.
Follow-up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Follow-up question. And obviously, there are certain crimes of this nature where the motivation is more apparent than others. In the example you gave of someone urinating on the altar on Good Friday, there's a certain obviousness about that. Well, would you agree that there are many crimes that potentially could fall in this category, that the motivation of the perpetrator is less than obvious and difficult to prove?
Representative Connolly?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Washit, absolutely. It's a question of fact that would be determined in the same kind of way.
Representative Oakley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to stay on this a little bit, Representative. Because you said it's a question of fact here, but it does appear that what we're doing is creating a legal process. So 610-401A, and then it describes an intentional act, the bias. But I don't see anywhere in here where it says then does that go to hearing? Who proves it? What's the standard? We would be still talking about, a defendant that has all the rights of the criminal justice system. So I'm assuming that this would then have to be proven. I'm assuming then you're talking of proving beyond a reasonable doubt, which again, that's fine, but then where is the process? Where in this would this be used? And maybe this is what we need to do to flesh out the bill some more. If it's going to be used as a sentencing enhancer or, which, judges can clearly already do, that this bill appears to be saying we're going to take this to a higher level. And I do think that's the intent, but I don't understand how this fits in the criminal justice legal process.
Representative Connolly?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Prosecutor Oakley. Great question. And getting a Wyoming procedure in the statute, I think, would be something that would be valuable as we go forward to make it clear how to do that.
Vice Chairman Washit?
Thank you. And I heard several commendations in your testimony about judges and prosecutors being tough on crime. And then I look on page 6 and 7, and all of the training obligations are geared towards law enforcement officers. No requirement for continuing legal education for prosecutors or judges. So I'm wondering, is there something in particular about law enforcement officers that makes you think that they need additional training in this regard where prosecutors and judges would not?
Representative Connolly?
Mr. Chairman, no.
This is a question from former law enforcement. Representative Williams, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Sweeney or Representative Connolly, either one of you could answer this question. I actually have two for you. The first one on page 3, under Romanet 2, line 15. If you can please explain to me what constitutes gender identity or expression. And then my second question is on line.
Let's take, are they separate questions?
Yes.
You can have as many questions as you'd like.
Okay,
So let's start with the first one.
thank you.
Representative Connolly?
No, it is not. Mr. Chairman, Representative Rodriguez Williams, is the phrase that is used that in the past we might have put down transgender, for example, but the reality is it is more expansive than that because of, and actually we have a bunch of students behind us who I think can kind of address this as well in terms of today's youth and what is referred to as gender fluidity. And so that your gender expression is not necessarily masculine or feminine. And so that is an encompassing term. And the reality is that the targets of bias motivated crimes, which have been kept and are kept by the federal government right now, indicate that this is one of the categories where we see the greatest number of individuals who are harmed. That it is because of gender identity or expression more than virtually anything else these days.
Representative Williams.
Thank you. If, Mr. Chairman, if I could proceed with my second
You
question.
may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, to either one of you, Representative Sweeney or Representative Connolly. Page 3, line 17 uses the word perception or perception of the person committing the crime was correct. And my question is, how do you prosecute somebody who perceives something?
Representative Connolly.
Chairman, that's a good question. And I wondered if anybody would ask about that one because it does seem confusing. But one of the first examples and one of the first states to kind of recognize these issues came with the AIDS crisis, honestly. And it was an example that came out of California and where there was targeting of gay men in the Tenderloin, an area of San Francisco, right? And gay men were being targeted and bashed in horrific kinds of ways, right? If we had just used sexual orientation, right? Sexual orientation, right? An individual who was severely harmed, who happened to be a Catholic priest. It was a Catholic priest who was working in the Tenderloin. He was just targeted because of the perception that he was a gay man. But instead, he had a ministry in the Tenderloin. So he was targeted as if he was gay. And so that's where that phrase comes from and why it's necessary in here because of the perception.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Representative Connolly. Mr. Chairman, no further questions.
Committee. Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a quick question and then I will stop, I think, so we can hear from some folks. But I guess I did want to bring up the discussion, the latter part of the bill or the second to last, I guess, it has to do with this reporting of these. So it requires all law enforcement agency. You know, I have some difficulty there with sort of the unfunded mandate, but my real concern and question would be that it's a requirement for all incidents believed or alleged, regardless of whether anything resulted from it. Don't you think that that seems extremely broad, burdensome, as well as, I mean, the question of reliability of such data to be that broad or inclusive?
Representative Sweeney.
So I believe somebody from the Attorney General's office is hopefully on. And we, you know, our intent here is to open up the conversation, and you're spot on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't address you. And obviously, I'm trying to, I appreciate being flanked by some expertise. I am an elevated dishwasher in my previous career and certainly not an attorney. But you know, we don't want to become overly burdensome with the language. And so we really appreciate your comments and take that to heart.
Well, Representative Sweeney, in the Judiciary Committee, you get 2 lifelines. You used one to call the AG's office. So let's take that segue and move over, I believe, do we have someone from the AG's office? Aha. Ms. Chambers. When the room is full and everyone has masks, it takes me a little while to recognize everybody.
Good afternoon. I was hiding in the back.
Ms. Chambers, do you have a response to the last question?
Chairman, yeah, Kara Chambers, Wyoming Attorney General's Office, Division of Victim Services. I have a lot of answers to a couple of questions. If it
Oh,
could perhaps
yeah.
be restated, I have a fair amount of information to provide.
Okay.
First of all, thank you for acknowledging some of the nuances in the bill that do affect the Attorney General's office. For some of the newer members, the Attorney General's office not only encompasses the law office, which is probably most what comes to mind, but we also have the Wyoming Law Enforcement Academy, the Peace Officers Standards and Training Board and Commission, the Division of Criminal Investigation, and then the redheaded stepchild, the Division of Victim Services. And that's just because I'm a redhead. And this bill does create some duties and requirements for our agency. I suppose I could sort of launch in from the beginning. It might make the most sense because I think it touches on some of Representative Williams' questions and some of Representative Oakley's questions, if I may.
Please.
I would like to begin on page 3. Really beginning on line 10 through 18, most specifically. There are some terms that are in here that are not specifically defined in the UCR, which is the Uniform Crime Report developed by the FBI. The first term that does not exist, but I think is encompassed in other terms, is on line 13, the term color. That is not a defined term in the UCR. The second term on line 14, national origin, is not a defined term in the UCR. They use the term ancestry. I believe they're intended to cover one and the same. The next term on line 15, technically the term expression is not defined, but that's probably a harmless insertion because the FBI UCR does under gender identity, they refer to anti-transgender and anti-gender non-conforming, and perhaps expression reflects that.
Vice Chairman Washit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chambers, I know, but I'm not sure everyone in the room understands what's the significance of not being identified within the UCR or what the UCR is.
Chairman Olson,
Ms. Chambers.
Representative Washit, thank you. And I forget. The significance of this relates back to the reporting requirements. So, you know, when we're bureaucrats, we get very bogged down in the details and we want to make sure we're using the correct terms and identifying the right thing. So when you have a term that's not defined in the UCR, it makes it subjective for the reporting agency, DCI. Are we tracking the correct info? Where do I insert this? And it would be very helpful for DCI under the duties that you create in the latter part of the bill if we could have matching conforming language. So thank you, Representative Washit. And again, UCR Uniform Crime Report. Still on line 15, a term that's also not defined in the UCR is, well, technically they use the term disability. And that encompasses anti-mental disability and anti-physical disability. The term intellectual or developmental is not used. And that was flagged by DCI as we're not sure how you want us to track that. And so that's line 15 through 16. Moving on to line 17, just wanted to point out per an earlier question that the term perception is a term used in the UCR. So that's not a problematic term for us. It could be for you. If I may take one moment to address an earlier question about, and I believe it was Representative Oakley, about why have this in state law, since it's not, a crime into itself and it's not a defined sentence enhancement, et cetera. If I may, one of the duties of the Division of Victim Services, contingent upon receiving federal funding through the Department of Justice, was a newly created duty to report on victimization. And that is separate from crime type. And there are 5 categories of victimization that the US Congress wishes us to report on. And that is bullying, hate crime, domestic or family violence, elder abuse, and mass incidences. When this was created as a category for reporting, a lot of the states, and ours included, were not really sure how we were supposed to do that on things like bullying and hate crime. Bullying is not in itself a crime type. It could be a component to a crime. So you would have assault or battery or what have you. And obviously, Wyoming not having hate crime statutes, we weren't sure how or if we can. And so we do not. The argument being that it would be, and it really does, we're a small state and a small agency, it would fall on me. I would be personally the one clicking the box on victimization. And I have not done that for bullying nor hate crime because I don't feel I have the proper directive to do so.
Vice Chairman Washit.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, do the reports that, Ms. Chambers, the reports you receive from law enforcement throughout the state, are they designed in a format that captures such detail?
Ms. Chambers.
Chairman Wilson, Representative Washington, they are not. I would have to, and I do, we do read the reports, don't get me wrong. I would have to read through and make a judgment call, which I'm not always comfortable doing, especially for a federal report on those 2 categories. Domestic violence, and in fact, I can tell you, the only 2 of those 5 victimizations that the state of Wyoming Division of Victim Services has ever reported on have been elder abuse and DV family violence, because those are quantifiable. If I may move on then. So to follow through with why I bring that up is that would be the benefit of having passed this state level legislation to define that for us. If I could direct your attention to page 6, lines 10 through 13. This is another nuance. Each criminal justice agency, so what I will refer to as local law enforcement, they do not report directly to the FBI. They report to DCI, who then submits the UCR. And that was just a clarification they wanted me to make. But that already occurs, yes. Chairman Olson.
Representative Oakley.
But quickly on that, wouldn't that tie back to page 5, lines 1 through 3? So they've got every local reporting to the AGs and then AGs reporting to the feds. But this indeed does produce the requirement for every law enforcement agency in our state to be reporting.
Chairman Olson. Representative Glee, yes, just wanted to clarify, they had some heartburn with that sentence, but they wanted to be clear that the law enforcement agencies do not directly report to the FBI. But we do, the state reports to the FBI. Same page 6, and the paragraph beginning on line 15. I want to point out that that is Article 7, which is the Peace Officers Standards and Training Commission. And this language is probably properly under there, but I did want to point out that by inserting the Wyoming Attorney General's Office Division of Victim Services shall pursuant to 91638A Romanet 4 provide training, we thought it was a little misleading. And if I may, that section of our statute reads, Division of Victim Services shall, and I'll jump to Roman numeral 4, coordinate and provide training, grant application assistance, and other support for community-based programs and services for victims. And we're happy to do that. And the division does do that. Maybe not directly. We may provide grant funds for various training, whether it's to law enforcement, prosecutors, community services, whether it's human trafficking or domestic violence or whatnot. We do that, but we just thought it was a little perhaps misplaced to have that, just that sentence in there. I think what this is properly intended to do is make sure that the peace officers standards and training, I'm going to call it post, includes this sort of training in their required curriculum. I would just suggest maybe it makes it seem like my division has to do it and we would come in, and that might not necessarily be the reality of it. But we are, of course, happy to do this. And in reality, what may very well happen is my office will subgrant to have this training and assist DCI and the Law Enforcement Academy to have this training. But I just wanted to clarify that it made it seem like we had to train.
Yeah, I think we're tracking on the education. There's definitely, I mean, there's some things to flesh out in with the CLE, I think, in general.
Yes. I don't know if there was a question.
Mr. Chairman.
I'd like to move on from the education, so. Representative Sweeney?
Mr. Chairman, so I definitely appreciate this, but our intent today was just informational, and we didn't intend to actually move or work the bill.
Well, we're not, Representative Sweeney, we're not working the bill. We're just taking testimony from our Attorney General's office.
Okay.
Kara, other than enforcement, or I'm sorry, CLE. So we're talking about your office is involved here with reporting and CLE.
Chairman, not CLE. We would with post certification. We're charged with reporting and training law enforcement in this bill.
Sorry. Yeah.
With this, and I apologize. That's why I was in the back. I wasn't intending to come up, but I did want to make sure that we're clear on this. I believe unless there are questions, I certainly don't want to bog down in the details, but I did want to address that.
No, we appreciate that. We do.
You know, I would be remiss if I didn't say that there would be a cost to our agency. I believe that's something we can address later. But thank you. And I will return to the back of the room if there are questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chambers. Okay, let's move to the public. Clarissa, in the virtual world, do I have any hands raised from individuals who want to testify? Folks, I will say I've only got 45 minutes left before we go back in. So I'm going to slightly modify a statement I made earlier, adjusting 3 minutes to 2 minutes. And I do apologize, but I want to hear from as many people as I can, as opposed to a few people. So that's my goal. Clarissa?
Mr. Chairman, we have 8 folks with their hand raised. There are 13 in the waiting room, and more hands are popping up. I do see Miss Burlingame. Would you like me to bring her in?
Yeah, please admit former Representative Burlingame.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes, Ms. Burlingame, we can hear you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm happy to be greeting you today from beautiful Rock Springs, Wyoming. And seeing that we're down to 2 minutes, I'm just going to speed through this. One of the things that you're going to hear today, we hope that you continue to take this bill to the interim so it can be worked in a more thoughtful process and you can hear from all the stakeholders, is the question of the need in Wyoming. So I'm speaking to you today as the director of Wyoming Equality, the state's only statewide LGBTQ advocacy group. And I was reminded this week, my social media started reminding me that 5 years ago today, I was up in Campbell County. And I was up in Campbell County because we had had a suicide of a young man. And I think that his suicide is instructive to the conversation that we're having today about the need for a hate crime bill and some of the invisibility, the people that we don't see reflected in the numbers. Because what happened with this young man, which became public, after his suicide, was that he had been the victim of numerous hate crimes. His car had been defaced, obscenities had been written on them, homophobic slurs. He had been assaulted, and he took pictures of himself with his swollen eye and his contused cheek. And none of those crimes were ever reported to the police. The first time that the police became involved with this young man was when they had to find his body in the public park. So on behalf of Wyoming Equality, our conversation with local law enforcement was to just understand that it's traumatic for them. That was a trauma that, that officer had to go through. That's something that he'll live with, for the rest of his life. And that oftentimes these violent crimes that are committed, there are things that work up to them. And there's ways that communities suffer in silence and out of step with law enforcement, out of step with social workers or people who could be there as support. And what we see this bias crime bill as doing is being a way to help connect some of those communities. We believe that law enforcement does a good job with the tools that they're given. And we see the piece of this bill that says education and training as being one more way that we let our law enforcement officers have the skills and the training that they need in order to do their job effectively.
Sarah, I got you at 2.5 minutes. I'll let you go for the next.
That's very kind. Thank you so much. I'll stand for any questions, and lovely to see you all.
Thank you. Committee, questions for former Representative Burlingame? Okay. I'm going to bounce a little bit between the virtual world and the in-person world because I do have former Representative Nathan Winters in the room as well. Not sure if you'd like to speak, but you certainly can.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. It's wonderful to see you all again. Let me just say this very quickly. No person should be the victim of a crime, however they identify. This bill, I believe, has a noble intention to try to prevent people from being targeted based on certain characteristics. But the practical reality is that this is very difficult to prosecute in other states. And to the extent that it is prosecuted, it relies on a thought policing kind of system. And you'll hear it said that Wyoming is the equality state. I agree. It's for that reason we have to defend the dignity of people in our state in a fair and equal manner by enforcing existing law and encouraging civil dialogue and unity instead of discord and segmentation. And this particular bill and bills like it, hate crimes laws, focus on the differences between us. They serve to further drive a wedge between social groups by allowing the media to focus on hate crimes between perceived social groups. While prosecutors are trying to determine what actually happened and if the criteria fits, creating further social groups and division and resentment often has the practical results of perpetrators having certain favored groups have heightened sentences and disfavored groups have a different outcome when the same thing happens. One New York University law professor phrased it this way: the hate crime law movement recriminalizes conduct that is already criminal. In effect, it creates a hierarchy of victims, one based upon group identities of perpetrators and victims, as long as prosecutors can prove a bias motive. Thus, from the beginning, hate crimes laws have simply given us something else to argue about. Hate crime law further politicizes a law enforcement and criminal justice process that does best when it is perceived as being apolitical and even-handed, not the tool of identity politics. It was already referenced that in 2015, that was the last time that this issue came up. In 2015, we were meeting in this building. It was the day, I remember it well because it was the day my mother passed. I stayed behind to specifically address this issue because the idea and principle of religious freedom and freedom of conscience is at the core of what it means to be fundamentally American. And it's for that reason, again, this time later, I'm speaking against it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your time.
Thank you, former Representative Winters. Representative Zwanitzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I saw former Representative Winters was wearing a lobbyist badge. Wasn't sure if he was here representing an industry or group or himself.
Oh, thank you. Will you please clarify that?
Certainly. My name is Nathan Winters. I'm the Executive Director of the Family Policy Alliance of Wyoming.
Thank you. Vice Chairman Washut.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Former Representative Winters, thank you for being here today. You mentioned that these crimes are hard to prosecute in other states. Do you have any data on that, or is that just a general summary statement?
I can supply with you, Mr. Chairman. I can supply with you afterward a Pace University Law Review Journal from 2016 that kind of goes into greater depth on that. And that will give you more data than I could recite right here.
Will you email that to the committee, please?
I'd be honored to. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions? Representative Yin, over there in the corner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Former Representative Winters, thank you for joining us. So maybe I need a little bit more elaboration on what you mean by social group, because I think it's been in the news that Asian American hate crime has been on the rise essentially around the country. Do I think it's happening in Wyoming? I'm not going to say whether or not what my thoughts are there, but my question to you is, am I a social group because of the color of my skin, or maybe I just need some expansion on what you mean by social group when it comes to the legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the question because exactly what we're pushing for is to not have people separated by social group. This kind of law does just that thing. It separates us by social groups to then be prosecuted in different ways. And what we believe in is that America is the melting pot of nations and wish to continue that wonderful and long trend in American society.
Further questions for former Representative Winters? Thank you,
Thank you, Mr.
Nathan. Your jacket is day late, though. I will say that.
No, thanks.
All right, get Mr. Shaver online. Mr. Shaver, you can go ahead and turn on your system, and you got 2 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. And I really appreciate the robust and very good conversation. I'm going to try to not repeat some of the points that have been made, but I do represent the Anti-Defamation League, which of the Mountain States, which covers Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico. I'm very proud that we have 515 supporting members in Wyoming. Pathfinder High School in Lander is one of our 94 No Place for Hate schools this year. And I've also been fortunate to conduct trainings for several law enforcement agencies in the state. ADL has worked on this issue for more than 25 years and actually drafted a model legislation in 1981 that most states now use for the basis for their laws. I want to just hit on 2 points. The first, I think we've heard a lot already about the need, and I think I just want to emphasize that one thing that does make these types of crimes stand out is the dual impact. The impact not only on the target or the victim of the crime, but for those who share that person's identity and for the community at large. I think it's really important to note that in the vast majority of these types of crimes, absent the victim's personal characteristics, no crime would have been committed at all. So that's really important to note. And because bias-motivated crimes are, have unique harms, that's why we have these things. And there's broad support by law enforcement, including the International Association of Chiefs of Police, which also has a really helpful model policy on reporting for law enforcement agencies, as well as the National District Attorneys Association. So let me just turn my attention to 2 of the misconceptions I do see about bias crime laws. The first is that they criminalize speech or they impact speech. These types of laws do not criminalize speech, and they do not infringe on the exercise of religion. Hate speech, as we know, is constitutionally protected, And individuals are free to believe and say whatever they want and to preach however they want based on their religious values. And that's really important. But bias-motivated crimes only apply when somebody actually commits a crime and targets the victim because of that protected characteristic. Unless
you,
there's an
Mr.
underlying
Mr.
crime.
Shaver.
Yes,
Sorry, Mr. Shaver, those 2 minutes, they fly.
they do fly. Okay, well,
Want to wrap,
I just
just
want-
give you a closing, wrap it up.
just to state that the ADL stands ready to work with lawmakers on this. We are glad to see this conversation, and we're ready to be of assistance. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shaver. Mr. Jonathan Lang, go ahead and turn on your camera. Welcome, introduce yourself to the committee, and you have 2 minutes to share your thoughts with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Jonathan Lang, private individual from Evanston, Wyoming. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
All right. So I want to speak as a Lutheran pastor and just cut to the chase. Love for the neighbor flows out of love for God, and that's why Christians teach that we should fear and love God, so that we, in everything we say and do, we love our neighbors. And I speak against HB 218 because it doesn't address this, I'm afraid. The bias and hate are at the heart of every crime, not just some crimes. And HB 218 focuses on certain groups, as Mr. Winters pointed out, but not on the persons themselves and the crime itself. And so it enhances criminal penalties based on group considerations, but not the heinousness of the crime. And so I'm speaking against this bill because I think rather than removing bias from Wyoming statute, it injects it in two ways. And the first is that anytime a law singles out certain groups, those that are left unmentioned by that very fact become victims of bias. They become invisible to the law. So for instance, while that bias destroys equal justice under law, and you might just think about the newborn human beings that are not mentioned here. They can easily become invisible to the protections of Wyoming law, and that's evident in the Senate's debates on Senate File 34 in the Born Alive Infant Protection Act. But besides this selective naming of some groups to the exclusion of others, there's a second problem. And that is when the law is conceived of in group categories, even where all the groups are mentioned, it creates a bias against the individual. Wyoming citizens who've been individually injured receive less justice than those who are injured as members of some group. And I want to speak specifically as a member of a targeted group that's been named by several presenters, that is Christians. For the record, I do not want prosecutorial discretion to be biased towards the prosecution of crimes against the church to the detriment of prosecuting an otherwise identical crime against any private citizen who is not a part of a targeted group.
Mr. Lang, thank you. I let you go for 2.5 there. I gave
Thank you very much.
Discretion, so we appreciate you. Thank you.
All
right. If you're in the room and you're going to testify on this bill, can you raise your hand? Mr. Steenbergen.
Bringing my stopwatch. I got one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee. I'll make it brief. I'd like to put a little different slant on this. And that is, I'd like to talk about economic development. There's a Scottish poet that wrote a poem called Ode to a Louse. He's sitting in church and he's watching a louse crawl in and out of lady's hairdo. And he made the comment about that, oh, what, it's paraphrased, but oh, what good it would be us to see ourselves as others see us. Right? I've been sitting to this legislature talking about how to solve our economic problems. And we keep talking about low taxes, and yet high tax states are growing all over the country. So there's some other reasons that that's happening. So if you talk to business leaders across this country, where are they spending money? They're spending money where they can get workforce. What's workforce interested? You can go online and read study after study after study. They want to be in places that have diversity, equity, inclusion. They like people of other races. They don't mind people that think differently than them. And they're very interested in this. It's also interesting that those companies that have diversity, equity, inclusion in their company profile make more money than other companies do. You heard that list read? Microsoft, Coca-Cola, Walmart. These are companies that we need to spend money here. These are the CEOs from those companies saying we support this kind of legislation. I was thinking about whether I was going to throw my neighbors under the bus, and I think I'm going to go ahead and do it. So the other two states in this country that don't have this are South Carolina and Arkansas. South Carolina is the place you stop to get peaches driving from North Carolina to Georgia. And Arkansas is the place with the bumpy roads that you stop and get gas on as you're doing business either in Oklahoma and Texas, and you skip over to do business in Tennessee. Folks, this is an issue we need to get fixed. We're one of three. Our competitors in Nebraska definitely have it, right? Chambers over there are hiring diversity, equity, and inclusion people to do this. I know I'm running very short, Mr. Chairman, so I'm going to speed it up. Just to end this, I would say this. My first call when I started working on this issue was to my friend Carlos, who is a Black Chamber of Commerce director in Columbia, South Carolina, or Greenville. I can't remember, Greenville. Anyway, Carlos is a sharp dude. And I said, why do we need this, Carlos? And he said, let me tell you something. You come and spend one day with my kids, and that night you look in their face and tell them they don't deserve a bill like this to protect them. And he said, I'll go along with anything you say. He said, I don't think that will be your answer. You will be all in for this legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity.
Mr. Steenbergen, just to clarify one thing you said, because I think it's important, which
Yep.
is that Wyoming is one of only two states that doesn't have a
Three.
lawsuit bill.
Three states, South Carolina, Arkansas, and Wyoming.
Okay, thank you. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Steenberger.
That's pretty close. Steenbergen, you did
Birkin?
good.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't catch what organization you're with or what company you're with.
I am with the Greater Cheyenne Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you, sir.
Committee, questions for Mr. Steenbergen? No? All right. That was an effective, quick way to testify. Miss Virese on the Zoom.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chairman and the committee. My name's Janet DeVries. Even though I grew up in Ohio and have lived in Casper for nearly 40 years, I do consider myself a Wyomingite. I fell in love with Wyoming on a Girl Scout camping trip to Tent Sleep and then moved here right after college. I love our open spaces and clear skies. I worked in the oil field during the boom and bust of the 1980s. Then I changed careers by graduating from the University of Wyoming with a master's in counseling, and I worked at Casper College for 21 years. As an out lesbian, I have been a contributing member of our community by working hard, paying taxes, donating to nonprofits, and volunteering. But in spite of my service to the community and love for our state, it's not always a safe place to be LGBT. I was called derogatory names at a store because of the way I look, the way I'm perceived. I was harassed by coworkers for supporting gay and lesbian students. I know a gay man who was physically attacked in a grocery store parking lot, and others who received phone calls saying, "We're going to do the Matthew Shepard to you." In order for all people to thrive and recruit companies and talent to our state, we must protect everyone, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity. I urge you to support House Bill 218, bias-motivated crime. It's good for individuals as well as important to help expand and promote our state's economy. I thank you for your consideration and will stay for any questions.
Thank you for your testimony, and the first to testify under the 2-minute mark, Vice Chairman Washit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. DeVries, a pleasure. I was hoping you would testify today. Good to see you again. My question for you is on the speech aspect, where you talk about people being called names and those sorts of things. That's not going to change with this law. That's my worry. And it, I don't want to overstate what we're going to accomplish if we pass a law like this. Those kinds of attitudes can't be legislated. you know, and so I think we can maybe reach actions, but those vocalizations that don't rise to the level of crime aren't going to be affected by this legislation. Would you agree with that?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Washit, yes, I agree. Hate speech is definitely protected. I just want you to know that I have personally experienced it, and I know people who have been physically harmed because of their sexual orientation or perceived sexual orientation. Thank you.
Thank you. In the room wishing to testify, raise your hands. We have the students from Cody, right? So if you're a student from Cody, come on up. I think that's my group over in the corner. I don't know what gave it away that you were students from Cody, but I figured it out. It may be that you filled up our halls this morning.
We like to do that every year.
We got one more chair for you.
Hi, Sarah.
Hey.
Okay, I guess.
Welcome,
I'll
and
start.
go ahead and you can introduce your group, and then you got to have the green light on because that's the camera zooms in on you.
Get 2 minutes each.
We'll
Okay.
give you. We're not going to give you 2 minutes each, but I'll give you a couple of minutes collectively.
Okay, so I'm Sage Crofts with Cody Youth for Justice, and we're Cody Youth for Justice. I guess I'll just start real quick. We're all just gonna go in little sequences here. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. But so I'm here in support of House Bill 218. In the next few weeks, I'll be deciding where I'm attending college as a senior. And unfortunately, I feel uncomfortable with attending college or university in Wyoming. Despite scholarships and a lot of other financial benefits in Wyoming, myself and many of my peers feel uncomfortable living in an area that does not support the right for victimized individuals to seek the justice that they seek after they've been affected by a biased crime. This bill supports large, diverse communities and welcoming them into the Wyoming community. And this lack of bias-motivated crime protection is a factor that deters me from residing in Wyoming or returning later in life. So I'll turn it over to the rest of my group, but thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and the House Judiciary Committee. My name is Sarah Andre. I'm here representing Cody Youth for Justice, and I'm speaking in support of House Bill 218, bias-motivated crimes. Recently in my community, a lesbian couple who has lived in Cody for years was approached by their neighbors and told that their kind was not welcome in Wyoming. That was then followed by threats. This message was not one directed to only them. It was a message to anyone like them or like-minded. In a state that prides itself on equality, these actions cannot slip through the cracks. In order to keep and attract Wyoming citizens, everyone must feel safe and welcomed. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you. I'm Gillian Growney here with Cody Youth for Justice as well, also in support of House Bill 218. I am someone whose grandparent is a member of the LGBTQ community. After the situation that Ms. Andre spoke on, my grandpa's safety has come up a lot. My grandpa does not live in Wyoming. However, we have been trying for years for him to make Wyoming his retirement community. Because of the recent hate crime being ignored as a biased crime, it has created an unwelcome atmosphere for him and many others. It's very important to me that people should feel safe and equal in the equality state. If we want people residing in Wyoming, we need to prioritize all people's safety and make them feel welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for letting me speak today. My name is Sophie Anderson, also with Cody Youth for Justice in support of the bill. And I just wanted to share a personal story today. So my freshman year, I took a class called Mass Communications, and we were tasked with the duty of creating a video about anything we wanted. And the first person that came to mind was my grandma, because she is one of the most inspirational people in my life and the kindest. And I wanted to do just a little clip on her life because she grew up in the Soviet Union when it was reigned by the Communist Party. And my family comes from a lineage of Muslim heritage, and she is a practicing Muslim woman. And I wanted to do a video on just how she survived all of that. And, she wasn't allowed to practice, and they had lived in fear of, and they weren't allowed to be proud of who they are. And when I brought this to her, I was super excited that I was going to be able to share with my peers just how amazing of a woman she was. She did not react with the same excitement. She was actually very scared. She came with fear that me living in Cody, Wyoming, which is something like I never thought to question, that my teachers, my students, my peers would then treat me differently because they would know that I have a Muslim grandmother. And this to me was extremely saddening because she's someone I love and one of the most highest people that I love in my life. And she no longer lives in Cody, Wyoming. And the fact that she did not feel comfortable sharing her history and her experience in Cody, Wyoming, and then the fact that she had the same kind of fear that she had living in a communist country is just something that feels really wrong to me. So I hope that you really consider the, the bill, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Oh, and
Well, you don't have to stand, but you can sit. Questions for our students? Representative Washit.
Thank you. First off, I'd like to say thank you for coming today and for engaging in the process. I hope you're finding your time at the Capitol enlightening and worth the long trip. You probably get to drive home in some pretty heavy snow. I hope you make it home safely. My comment, or more of a question for you is was your grandmother ever victimized in a way? Was she assaulted or any of those kinds of acts while she was in Cody, Wyoming? And the reason I ask that, and also to the other question about your kind are not wanted here, those are, that's a verbal expression which is not going to be addressed by this law. So I want expectations to be realistic about what kinds of things can be addressed with legislation.
I think thank you for your question, Representative Washit. I can go ahead and answer that if that's okay. My grandmother was never personally targeted while living in Cody, Wyoming, because she was too scared to actually come forward as a Muslim woman. She did not tell that to many people, whereas when she lived in South Dakota, she actually joined a community of Muslim women there, and they were all proud to be Muslim, and they just had a great time like experiencing that together. And they do have a bias hate crimes law in South Dakota and in Cody, Wyoming specifically, but in Wyoming, she just has not experienced that kind of acceptance that she did in South Dakota. And that's just saddening to me because I live in Wyoming, so I'd like her to feel welcome here as well.
Thank you.
In response to your question about your kind are not welcome here, it was not an assault of any kind. So I get that the bill would not cover that. However, it does show potential that these people who are neighbors showed up to this couple's house and told them that their kind is not welcome here and threatened them. I feel like that sends a strong statement to anyone else like them, that there's potential for harm.
Thank you. And thank you for traveling here from Cody to testify. We appreciate that.
Can I add just one more thing, Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
I just wanted to say to your very last statement, I do understand I understand how realistic the bill is, but I feel like it's a step in the correct direction to fix some of these issues that we've seen with personal experiences. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. In our virtual world, we have from Walmart, Deborah Heron. Deborah, go ahead and introduce yourself to the committee, and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Olson, and good afternoon to the House Judiciary Committee. Is my volume level okay for you?
It's just fine.
Great. We are here today on behalf of Walmart and our 4,500 associates in the state of Wyoming. As some of you know, we have met in prior sessions. We operate 12 stores in the state, 2 Sam's Clubs, and a distribution center here in Cheyenne. So we've made a great investment in Wyoming over the years and plan to continue to do so. For those of you who are new to the legislature or new to this committee, it is delightful to see you today. I wish I was in Cheyenne, but appreciate the opportunity to be on the Zoom video and to share our thoughts as much in person as we can. As I just mentioned, Wyoming has a long investment in Wyoming. Walmart has a long investment in Wyoming, and we continue to turn on growth opportunities like providing curbside and delivery at many of our stores throughout the state. We demonstrate our commitment to this economy as well through $27 million that is spent each year with suppliers in the state of Wyoming for an additional 3,800 jobs. So collectively, that's close to 8,000 jobs that Walmart is supporting throughout the state. It's on behalf of all of our associates and customers that we are in full support of HB 218. You've heard in prior testimony that Arkansas and South Carolina are states that also do not have bills that address these issues. Walmart is supportive and is part of the Business Coalition and People Coalition, frankly, in both of those states, addressing this year's legislative session for legislation to be approved. So we are consistent across all 3 states. We stand up for hate crimes because it's a way of standing up for everyone who works within Walmart. And it's an expression of solidarity to all of the community of customers and people who visit our retail stores as well as shop with us online. Walmart in and of itself is truly a representation of the communities we serve, even though individual philosophies of each
Ms. Heron, sorry.
person, sorry.
Yeah, your 2 minutes is up, Ms. Heron.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Let me just go in conclusion, if I may. One of our core basic beliefs is respect for the individual. And I hope that by sharing my words with you today, and I'm happy to answer questions or speak more offline, but respect for the individual is truly a part of our culture, of our people, and who we are. And this bill, we just urge you to support this bill as a reflection of that. Thank you very much for the time.
Ms. Heron, if Wyoming passes this law, will Walmart move its corporate headquarters to Wyoming?
Oh gosh, I cannot answer that, but I will certainly set up the opportunity to have that conversation with our executives.
Okay, that'd be great. Appreciate that. All right, questions for Ms. Heron? No? All right, thank you, Ms. Heron. We've heard several testimony in favor of the bill. Do we have anybody virtually or in the room who wishes to testify against this bill? Nope. Okay. Oh, ACLU.
Yes, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Sabrina King and I am here for the ACLU today. And I want to be very clear that while we do not support this bill as it is written, we actually have significant concerns with the bill as it is written on a lot of different levels. We do support the conversation about how bias is affecting people in Wyoming. But it does seem clear that this conversation is going to be moving to the interim. But what I will say is the other reason that we are opposed to this piece of legislation is the pure individualizing of the impact that bias has. If we are going to talk about bias in the state of Wyoming, I think we need to talk about it on both the individual level and on the agency level. I think if we do not look at the agencies who will be implementing this law and the bias in those agencies, then I think all we are doing is sitting in a glass house and throwing rocks. So I think if we are going to have this conversation, and I think it's good that we need to have this conversation, it needs to be broader than a simple individual bias crime law. The other thing that I will say is that there is no evidence that hate crime laws, that having those in place actually protects anyone in the community. So I will say also, as an out lesbian in the state of Wyoming, I would really love to live in a state where people are actually protected and that we have those elements in place in our state, not just passing laws to create the perception of having equality in the state. So with that, Mr. Chairman, when this comes up in the interim, we're happy to talk about the issues that we have with the bill, but we certainly don't have the time today. But with that, I will stand for questions.
Thank you, Ms. King. Questions for Ms. King? All right. Thank you, Ms. King. Mr. Raymond Drake, you can go ahead and turn on your camera. Introduce yourself, and you've probably been listening, so you have 2 minutes, and you do have to answer the question, if we pass this bill, will UPS relocate its corporate headquarters to the state of Wyoming?
Okay, will do. Good afternoon, Chairman Olson and members of the House Judiciary Committee. Pleased to be here. My name is Ray Drake. I'm Vice President of State Government Affairs for UPS. UPS has over 750 employees in Wyoming at more than 14 different facilities, serving every community in Wyoming's 23 counties. Each day, of course, our drivers are going through the roadways of Wyoming, servicing thousands of Wyoming residents and businesses. We're well integrated into all of your communities, no matter how rural or remote they may be. Our UPSers have responded valiantly this year to help our world move forward by delivering what matters, from supplies so we can live and work at home to PPE and now vaccines. And now we're asking the Wyoming State Legislature to deliver what matters as well, the passage of a bias-motivated crime legislation. As a company, we're committed to and driven by values of integrity, safety, and sustainability. These core beliefs not only guide us in our work, but how we live our everyday lives, and understanding all individuals deserve to be treated with fairness and dignity. Our people are UPS's most valuable asset, and we have come to realize how essential they truly are. And at UPS, we believe the greatest strength of our people is the diversity amongst them and the unique qualities that each one of them brings to work every day and to those they serve. We steadfastly believe it is our duty to ensure UPSers and individuals in Wyoming and throughout the nation are able to experience these values in their workplaces as well as their communities. Guided by those values, we believe now is the time to support passage of bias-motivated crime legislation in every state in our nation. Though federal legislation exists, we believe every state should definitely affirm that crimes committed as acts of bias and prejudice have no place in any community or state in our nation. To that end, UPS supported passage of this legislation in our headquarters state of Georgia. We also are engaged in Arkansas and South Carolina, as my colleague from Walmart just mentioned. As one of the 3 remaining states that yet to codify such legislation in law, we urge Wyoming to have this important discussion to protect all individuals from any attacks motivated by bias and prejudice. Our communities need strong solutions and specific actions in order to eradicate racial injustice and inequality, and we stand united across the entire U.S. against violence and hatred. We understand that these discussions are difficult and solutions are not simple to find, but a bias-motivated crime law is an important step to build a more inclusive Wyoming. We, along with others here today, are committed to work.
Mr. Drake, sorry, I let you go for a little bit over.
All right. My bad. Thank you for your time, though.
You're fine. 2 minutes goes by really fast. Vice Chairman Washit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Drake, appreciate you being with us by Zoom today. It's one of the beauties of this COVID world that we've learned that having virtual links allows us to have people testify before our committees who are distant and isolated by snow and miles, and it is hopefully going to be something that will endure beyond the COVID days. My question for you,
and
Mr.
your
Drake,
2 minutes is up, Representative Washit. Go ahead.
That's sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned safety, and I just want to know if you've read this bill and if you believe this bill would contribute to enhancing safety in the state of Wyoming.
I have read the bill, and I don't recall any specific portion of it that was specific to like safety in the workplace or safety and processes. I think probably the only thing that I can think of from safety is certainly perhaps something that, you know, makes people feel safer. But that's probably not safety in the context that I was talking about in when I was discussing our core values.
Thank you, Mr. Drake, for your testimony. We appreciate you joining us. I believe I might have some students from the University of Wyoming. Do I have students from the University of Wyoming? I see 3 heads nodding. 3 students from the University of Wyoming. 4 students from the University of Wyoming. 5. Nope, that's just Representative Sweeney. You're young. Representative Sweeney, your young appearance, always. All right, students, come on up. All right, so you each don't get 2 minutes, but I'll give you a couple of minutes similar to the students from Cody. So hopefully you're ready for that, and just go ahead and introduce yourself and share with us your, whatever you'd like to share. And maybe we'll, since there's 4 of you, we'll call it 4 minutes. And if the first one burns 3, then you guys could take that up with her.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If it's possible, I'd like to yield my time to my fellow student, Jada Cooper.
Okay, you may, you can, why don't, let's do this. So is everybody, is that, do you want to testify? And do you want to testify? And you're Miss Cooper. And do you want to testify? So why don't you all 4 introduce yourselves? Because as much as you're excited to actually testify on the legislation, we're just excited to have University of Wyoming students in front of us. So why don't you first introduce yourselves?
If you wouldn't mind, Chairman, I could give a brief introduction of what we're here to speak about, and then we have more specific cases. That might be a little bit easier.
Well, you
just
have
how
4
we kind of
minutes.
said
So
it.
why don't you go ahead and each introduce yourselves, and then I'll start the clock, and you guys can talk. Whoever wants to talk can talk. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for letting us be here to speak before you today. I'm Autumn Knight. I'm one of the senators for the College of Arts and Sciences for ASUW at the University of Wyoming.
Thank you, Autumn. Yeah, once it hits green, you're on.
All right, well, thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon to all. My name is Laura Perez. I'm a senior at the University of Wyoming studying psychology and Spanish with a minor in statistics. And I'm also the director of diversity for ACLU.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jada Cooper. I'm an Afro-Indigenous student at the University of Wyoming, and I am a student activist.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Taylor Nielsen, and I currently serve as the Director of Governmental and Community Affairs for ASUW.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. So who wants to start?
I'll start us off with a brief introduction. The University of Wyoming students are here today to discuss some issues that we've seen at the university and within our communities as well. We understand that a number of states obviously have implemented anti-hate crime laws to address these issues, and the state of Wyoming, for reasons stated before us, obviously has not, and this is alarming to the students. Working as the Director of Governmental and Community Affairs, I work with the students, with the city, and with other members of the state, and I've heard stories of attacks, prejudice, and a number of other issues regarding discrimination on our campus and within our state that have not been responded to by any entities that absolutely should have. We're here today to just bring attention to this and hope that these are valued within our communities, as the state of Wyoming is going to lose individuals within it. Other individuals have spoke to the economic benefits of this, and I would like to point out that 20% of students who leave the University of Wyoming do it because of discrimination and lack of support and protections. We're here today to speak to that, as we would like to continue to live in the state of Wyoming. But with that, we are here to share our stories. And with that, I will hand it off to students who can speak more directly to that.
Yes, thank you. Let's hear from the students.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know what I had to listen to a few weeks ago? Nigger Lives Matter. In a seminar meant for learning about Black Wall Street and the survivors' responses, we were bombarded by Nigger Lives Matter. And what did the president say in his statement? Students affected by hate speech and images should contact the University Counseling Center. You know who works in the UCC? Majority of them are white people, with the exception of one person who happens to be Latino. White people are telling us they don't condone the hate speech, but are also telling us to get help from people who will never understand our trauma. Black people are tired, Indigenous people are tired, Latinos are tired, Asians are tired, any other POC group who I might not have mentioned are tired. The LGBTQIA+ people are tired. We are all tired. We are tired of being attacked by people for being who we are. We can't change the color of our skin. We can't change our sexual orientation. We are tired of being attacked and not protected. I have never in my life been called a nigger in person. I have never in my life had to listen to the words nigger be uttered by a white person or a white man in person. And you know what made it even worse? In the email by the president and board of trustees sent to the whole student body, they basically said nothing that I haven't heard before. The words felt copied and pasted. I was told that hate speech is protected by the First Amendment. In the email, they said the First Amendment may allow expression that is preempted. So, okay.
reprehensible, but we have a responsibility to respond to it. Not only did he tell the students that hate speech is protected by the amendment, but also that they have a responsibility to respond to it. Since there aren't any anti-hate crime laws, they are very limited. Wyoming is one of 3 states that has no anti-hate crime laws. You would think a lynching that happened in this state would be the reason that an anti-hate crime bill was passed, but no. This state has a history of racism and hate crime. Do you want this state to always be remembered by those same events that took place? It is 2021. It is time we change the state. How many times do we have to sit here and wait for you to do something to protect us legislation-wise? You always push it away because you are biased by being mostly white and not accepting the fact that these laws weren't meant for you to ever ignore. We are tired of being ignored and pushed out because it doesn't fit your agenda. You are elected by the people to serve the people. We are the people. Why do people of color have to depend on white people to be protected? Why do we have to face our oppressors to be protected? Why do we have to beg to be protected? At this point, we might as well start calling all of y'all masses. I have been told that some politicians don't think this bill is necessary, but I am standing in front of you telling you that we need this bill. I shouldn't have to come here as an angry Black woman for something that may be considered. I shouldn't have to come here, a sophomore in college, to push for something that might be considered. My light-skinned Black nigger ass shouldn't have to be here in front of you for something that we may be considered. We want change. We are asking for change, and we won't stop until we get what we want. We want protection for our people. This speech isn't meant to attack you, but it is meant to make you understand our pain.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to say that I am from Jackson Hole, Wyoming, the happy place in Wyoming, supposedly. On December 30th, 2020, a police officer responded to a possible stabbing. The victim was a 50-year-old Mexican male, resident of Jackson. He was discovered with stabbing wounds. The suspect was a 38-year-old white man. After a 13-hour standoff, the police finally detained the white man and took him into custody. Although the man received charges for stabbing, he did not receive the charges for a bias-motivated crime. This was a hate crime, but due to Wyoming's lack of legislation and laws, no action was taken. As you're all debating the legislation, please remember, I am from Jackson, and that Mexican man could have been my dad. This man did not deserve to be stabbed for his color of the skin, the same skin color as mine. I am afraid for my own life. Thank you.
Thank you. Have any of you students testified before in the legislature?
Sorry, Chairman, I have testified before, however, not in front of Wyoming's.
Excellent. Well, thank you for one. I know it's not the longest trip over the hill, but we appreciate you coming over the hill. We appreciate you being in our capital today, and certainly appreciate you testifying. I'm a legislator and I testify on bills all day long, and sometimes I get nervous and sometimes I don't want to do it, and sometimes I don't know what to say. So I know that it's not necessarily the easiest thing to do. So really do appreciate your courage in testifying. Thank you. Committee questions for the students. Representative Yin.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. It's not really a question, but it is a comment. So I know exactly who you're talking about with the stabbing in Jackson, and it's distressing. And you know, we like to think that our community is safe, but I do appreciate your comments, and I do agree that, you know, part of the reason for the bill is that we want to help victims know that the state recognizes that something is happening because of bias. And again, I just thank you for coming here and providing those comments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Yin. Further questions for the students? Nope. Okay. Sorry, I wasn't sure if Representative Oakley had a question or. All right. Let's find someone in our virtual world who'd like to testify.
Mr. Chairman,
Yep.
Shannon Leskowski Monahan, as well as Mary Cockett, have been admitted to the meeting.
Okay. And just to let the committee know, yes, it is 2 o'clock. I've notified the majority floor leader and the speaker that we're still in hearing, and we have a bill on committee of the whole that it's probably going to go for a little while. So we've got some time and they're aware of our absence, but I'd sure like to finish up some testimony if I can. I will be cutting it off in just a few minutes. This will probably be the last testimony I take in the virtual world. And then maybe I'll take one more from in the in-person world. So please introduce yourself and you have 2 minutes.
Hello, my name is Shannon Listowski Monahan. I live in Wapiti, Wyoming, and I'm one half of the couple that the young lady from Youth for Justice spoke of. And myself, my spouse, who was a retired physician, moved here about 5 years ago. We knew we were moving into a conservative area, so we weren't surprised when we received some online harassment. Disappointed, but not surprised or shocked. And it was not a big issue for us until it escalated to the point where the sheriff contacted us and said he was aware of how vicious it was and that he was there for us if it escalated, which it did. In October, a group of people, only 2 of them that I knew, came to our home, and for reasons of time, I'll give it to you in a nutshell, that when we asked why they were here, point blank, we were told because she, pointing to my spouse of 30 years, pretends to be a man. You are not welcome here and you need to leave. I take that as a threat. They were emboldened by this because it had started with online harassment and other harassment that I won't get into. We were threatened, we were intimidated. When we asked them to leave, they said, we're not going anywhere. Even when we called 911 and had the sheriff's deputy on the phone, they said, we're not going, we're not leaving. When they finally did leave, we were, the police report indicated it was simple trespassing, which was okay because we didn't have a sign saying no trespassing. They intimidated us to the point where we immediately invested in a security system. For about a month, I did not answer the door. I froze if someone knocked on the door or if we received a delivery. The people that came to our home and told us that we needed to leave, nothing happened to them. They have every right to say anything they want, but they came to intimidate us. They did, mission accomplished, and there is absolutely no repercussion. It is my hope that this will not happen to another person, because we've since learned more about their history. There is no doubt in my mind it will happen to another person, and they will once again not be held accountable for coming onto someone's property, refusing to leave, and telling people that because of who they are, that they are not welcome in their community. I just very quickly want to say that when people learned about our situation, our entire community, it doesn't matter what demographic they were from, both friends, of which we've made many here, as well as people that we had no idea who they were, contacted us to say, this is not Wyoming. This is not what we stand for, and we are sorry this happened to you. That indicates to me.
Thank you. I'm sorry to let you go for a little over. We really appreciate
all of you.
Thank you. In the room, I got room for one last testimony if anyone would like to offer it. Ms. Herman, you want to? It's only because you're in the front row.
Committee, thank you for hearing me. I'm Marguerite Herman. I'm here for the League of Women Voters. I'll be very, very quick. About 7 or 8 years ago, the League of Women Voters of Wyoming did pass a resolution endorsing some form of hate crimes legislation. And since then, I've watched bills come that were flawed in 2 ways. And they ran into the misunderstanding that there was a potential that it would target innocent, unintended offenses. The offhand comment that would or the speech protection that would land yourself in hot water. And the other one was it would create a new crime or a new penalty or both. And this bill does neither. I would say it avoids both of those pitfalls. It may not go far enough, according to some of your critics, but it goes that far that if you come into this under this bill, you are in sentencing. So you have been charged and convicted with a very serious crime. So there's no one's going to be surprised that they're in that situation because they said an insensitive comment or just was misunderstood. You're in the sentencing part, and it does rely on the judge to use the sentencing authority under that crime anyway. So it's a modest beginning. I would hope that you would give due consideration to this, fix whatever imperfections are in it, and approve the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Herman. Questions for Ms. Herman? All right, committee, I am going to close public comment. At this point, it's been a while since I've seen a hand raised in opposition to the bill. I know there are many people who still want to speak in favor of the bill, and I do appreciate that. But at some point, I do have to close public testimony, only because the remainder of the House of Representatives is on the floor right now. And like I said earlier, they're hearing a very important issue to Wyoming, which is education. So I do want to get my members back. Yeah, thank you, Representative Swanser. That's a really good point. So if you're in the virtual world or you're here in person, there's a couple of things I'd like you to do. One, you should email us your testimony. If you have something to share with us, please absolutely do that. Two, you're also welcome to stick around. And as we make our way back to the chamber, there is a process that allows you to pull us out of the chamber. And if you'd like to talk to any of us individually about the legislation, I think that's a great opportunity while you're here as well. So I do appreciate that. And with that, committee, these are my thoughts as we digest the day. And as I set this bill for the day, I set it alone, talked to the sponsor of the bill, and the sponsor of the bill was trying to convince me that I could schedule another bill, that it would be okay. And here we are at 2:12. And I know my committee. And I've said this before, and this is the reason why I serve on the Judiciary Committee. And we hear topics on this committee that is like no other place in the chambers of this Capitol. And we hear the issues that most committees couldn't even imagine that they get to hear the testimony on. And we get to the things that were brought to us today from all over the world using the virtual world and from right here in Cheyenne, Wyoming, show me a couple of things. They show me, number one, that this is no small topic. And I think everyone deeply appreciates that, especially the sponsor and the coalitions that have brought this legislation. I think based on the room and based on the testimony that I hear, the other thing that I know that is certain is that this is an issue that matters, and it matters to the people of Wyoming. It matters to the people who are testifying, whether you are in favor of this legislation, opposed to this legislation, whether you are here to just simply address issues that you believe exist, whatever it may be, it's very clear that it matters. And that's why we're here as representatives, to address issues that matter to the people of the state of Wyoming. The question I have when I look at this bill, and as I discuss it with our Attorney General, who testified today, as testimony from our sponsors, questions from our committee, what became very apparent is that this legislation may not be ready for prime time. And I think the sponsor, that's not a surprise to the sponsor. The sponsor is well aware of the status of the legislation and the need to work it. And I think what we have in the room are many of the stakeholders. One concern I have is that not all of the stakeholders in Wyoming are in the room today, but no doubt will be, I think, at some point. So with that, I think some of the issues, Wyoming procedure in the statute was pointed out, education as it relates to judges and prosecutors and not just law enforcement, the definitions, obviously, the definition of a bias-motivated crime by itself, the language. I think there's a lot here, and it's a heavy lift. And so committee, what my position is my position would be that we should lay this bill back. And I think that this committee should seek an interim topic on this issue, because it is not as, while the idea may seem obvious that there's an issue and the fix may seem simplistic in only 7 pages, I think it is a highly complicated topic that will take an entire year with all of the stakeholders to work out that language, to get to a place where stakeholders are happy. I don't see that happening with this committee. And even if I were to continue this bill over tomorrow, which you'd be welcome to join us tomorrow, but tomorrow is marijuana day. I don't know how these two topics mix. That too will be a long topic. I just don't see the ability of this committee to work this bill, not with all the stakeholders present in such short time. So I would be looking for a motion to lay this bill back. I'd certainly take any comment from the committee as well. Representative Zwanitzer.
Mr. Chairman, I would make the motion to move the bill back with a recommendation to Management Council as an interim topic, which is difficult because there's a bill coming this year that might change up how Management Council deals with interim topics. So that being said, but I would make the motion to, I guess, postpone the bill for 2021 and recommend it to the interim.
Seconded by Representative Oakley. And I will say to that point, even the legislation that changes it, I believe the sponsor and some of the stakeholders have already discussed this with my counterpart in the Senate. So I think that between the chairs of the Judiciary, it's at least on our radars that is a very, whether that policy changes or not, we don't know. The legislative process will dictate that, but I think we'll find a way to get it to the interim. Discussion on the motion to postpone indefinitely. Representative Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, there's definitely, so many people came today to testify in favor, and I do agree that it is pressing, but I also want to make sure that something gets through. And I think that the way that happens is through the interim this time around. So I'll be in support of it, but I do want to urge to all of Wyoming that this issue is important, and I want to make sure that we can get something through this interim. So I'll call the question, Mr. Chairman.
Again, that doesn't require a roll call vote because it is just a motion to postpone indefinitely. All those in favor of the motion to postpone signify by raising your hand. All those opposed, that motion carries. This bill is postponed.